Today is the 11th of December 25. Had a little break. I'm reading Travels with My Aunt by Greene, published 1969. And this is about Henry Pulling, who is a retired bank manager, and he is on a trip with his Aunt Augusta, who he hadn't seen for decades, and met at his mother's funeral. I'm in chapter 7, and they are on a journey. And I finished in the middle of this chapter. Acting needs no excuse. I wasn't excusing myself, Aunt Augusta said sharply. I was explaining. In a profession like that, age is a handicap. I was lucky enough to leave in good time, thanks to Mr. Visconti. Who was Mr. Visconti? We were talking about your Uncle Joe. I found an old house in the country which had once been a palazzo or a castello or something of the kind. It was almost in ruins, and there were gypsies camping in some of the lower rooms, and in the cellar, an enormous cellar which ran under the whole ground floor, and had been used for wine, and there was a great empty tun abundant there because it had cracked with age. Once there had been vineyards around the house, but an autostrada had been built right across the estate, not 100 yards from the house, and the cars ran by all day between Milan and Rome, and at night the big lorries passed. A few knotted, worn-out roots of old vines were all that remained. There was only one bathroom in the whole house. The water had been cut off long ago by the failure of the electric pump, and only one lavatory on the top floor in a sort of tower. But of course there was no water there either. You can imagine it wasn't the sort of house anyone could sell easily. It had been on the market for 20 years, and the owner was a mongoloid orphan in an asylum. The lawyers talked about historic values, and Mr. Visconti knew all about history, as you could guess from his name. Of course he advised strongly against the purchase, but after all, poor Joe was unlikely to live long, and he might as well be made happy. I had counted up the rooms, and if you divided the cellar into 4 with partitions, and included the lavatory and bathroom and kitchen, you could bring the total up to 52. When I told Joe, he was delighted. A room for every week of the year, he said. I had to put a bed in every one, even in the bathroom and kitchen. There wasn't room for a bed in the lavatory, but I bought a particularly comfortable chair with a footstool, and I thought we could always leave that room to the last. I didn't think Joe would survive long enough to reach it. He had a nurse who was to follow him from room to room, sleeping 1 week behind him, as it were. I was afraid he would insist on a different nurse at every stopping place, but he liked her well enough to keep her as a travelling companion. What an extraordinary arrangement. It worked very well. When Joe was in his 15th room, he told me, I was back that week in Milan on my tour, and I came out to see him with Mr. Visconti on my day off, that it really seemed at least a year since he had moved in. He was going on next day to the 16th room on the floor above, with a different view, and his suitcases were all packed and ready. He insisted on everything being moved by suitcase, and I had found a second-hand one which was already decorated with labels from all kinds of famous hotels, the George V in Paris, the Quisiania in Capri, the Excelsior in Rome, Raffles in Singapore, shepherds in Cairo, the Pera Palace in Istanbul. Poor Joe, I've seldom seen a happier man. He was certain that death would not catch him before he reached the 52nd room. And if 15 rooms had seemed like a year, then he had several years of travel still before him. The nurse told me that about the 4th day in each room he would get a little restless with the wanderlust, and the first day in the new room he would spend more than his usual time in sleep, tired after the journey. He began in the cellar and worked his way upwards until at last he reached the top floor, and he was already beginning to talk of revisiting his old haunts. We'll take them in a different order this time, he said, and come at them from a different direction. He was content to leave the lavatory to the last. After all these luxury rooms, he said, it would be fun to rough it a bit. Roughing it keeps one young. I don't want to be like one of those old codgers one sees in the Cunard travelling first class and complaining of the caviar. Then it was that in the 51st room he had had his second stroke. It paralyzed him down one side and made speech difficult. I was in Venice at the time, but I got permission to leave the company for a couple of days, and Mr. Visconti drove me to Joe's palazzo. They were having a lot of difficulty with him. He had spent 7 days in the 51st room before the stroke knocked him out, but the doctor was insisting that he remain in the same bed without a move for at least another 10 days. Any ordinary man, the doctor said to me, would be content to lie still for a while. He wants to live as long as possible, I told him. In that case, he should stay where he is till the end. With any luck, he'll have 2 or 3 more years. I told Joe what the doctor said, and he mouthed a reply. I thought I made out not enough. I stayed quiet that night. He stayed quiet that night, and all the next morning, and the nurse believed that he had resigned himself to staying where he was. She left him sleeping and came down to my room for a cup of tea. Mr. Visconti had brought some cream cakes in Milan at the good pastries cook near the cathedral. Suddenly, from an upstairs, there came a strange grating noise. "Mamma mia," the nurse said. "What's that?" It sounded as though someone was shifting the furniture. We ran upstairs, and what do you think? Joe Pulling was out of bed. He had fixed an old club tie of his, the froth blowers or the mustard club or something of the kind, to the handle of the suitcase because he had no strength in his legs, and he was crawling down the passage towards the lavatory tower, pulling the suitcase after him. I shouted for him to stop, but he paid no attention. It was painful to look at him. He was going so slowly with such an effort. It was a tiled passage, and every tile he crossed cost him enormous exertion. He collapsed before we reached him and lay there panting, and the saddest thing of all to me was that he made a little pool of wee-wee on the tiles. We were afraid to move him before the doctor came. We brought a pillow and put it under his head, and the nurse gave him one of his pills. "Cattivo," she said in Italian, which means, "You bald old man," and he grinned at the two of us and brought out the last sentence which he ever spoke, deformed a bit, but I could understand it very well. "Seemed like a whole lifetime," he said, and he died before the doctor came. He was right in his way to make that last trip against the doctor's orders. The doctor had only promised him a few years. "He died in the passage?" I asked. "He died on his travels," my aunt said in a tone of reproof, as he would have wished. "Here he lies where he longed to be," I quoted, in order to please my aunt, though I couldn't help remembering that Uncle Joe had not succeeded in reaching the lavatory door. Home is the hunter home from the sea, my aunt finished the quotation in her own fashion, and the sailor home from the hill. We were silent for quite a while after that, as we had finished the chicken a la king. It was a little like the 2-minute silence on Armistice Day. I remembered that when I was a boy. I used to wonder whether there was really a corpse buried there at the cenotaph, for governments are usually economical with sentiment and try to arouse it in the cheapest possible way. A brilliant advertising slogan doesn't need a body. A box of earth would do just as well. And now I began to wonder, too, about Uncle Joe. Was my aunt a little imaginative? Perhaps the stories of Joe, of my father and of my mother, were not entirely true. Without breaking the silence, I took a reverent glass of Chambertin to Uncle Joe's memory, whether he existed or not. The unaccustomed wine sang irresponsibly in my head. What did the truth matter? All characters once dead, if they continue to exist in memory at all, tend to become fictions. Hamlet is no less real now than Winston Churchill, and Joe Pulling no less historical than Don Quixote. I betrayed myself with a hiccup while I changed our plates, and with the blue cheese the sense of material problems returned. Uncle Joe, I said, was lucky to have no currency restrictions. He couldn't have afforded to die like that on a tourist allowance. They were great days, Aunt Augusta said. How are we going to manage on ours, I asked. With £50 each, we shall not be able to stay very long in Istanbul. Currency restrictions have never seriously bothered me, my aunt said. There are ways and means. I hope you don't plan anything illegal. I have never planned anything illegal in my life, Aunt Augusta said. How could I plan anything of the kind when I have never read any of the laws and have no idea what they are? So, Woman After My Own Heart. Here is the end of chapter 7, and I continue chapter 8 soon. Have a lovely Thursday.